My title is Hilda. I'm 60 years old, and what I'll share with you now will always alter how you view your relatives. Only 3 days back, my child Damien and his spouse Melissa shoved my partner Henry and me from a 90-foot ledge. As I rested their injured and leaking blood, I caught my partner's urgent murmur, "Hilda, stay still, act lifeless." But that wasn't the harshest part. The harshest was when Henry disclosed the most awful fact a parent could learn, a hidden detail our offspring had concealed for 25 years. For 4 decades, Henry and I created what we believed was an ideal household. We rose each morning in our modest suburban dwelling where the aroma of new coffee blended with the noise of birds chirping. I served as an instructor at the nearby primary school, and every evening I returned with tales of my young pupils. Henry owned his woodworking studio where he crafted the finest furnishings imaginable. His palms, coarse but precise, could convert a basic slab of timber into a masterpiece. We raised 2 boys, Richard, our eldest, and Damien, 5 years junior. Richard was the heart of the residence, constantly cheerful, always aiding his dad in the studio, always protecting me from concerns. Damien differed, more withdrawn, but I cherished him with equal fervor. As a parent, you avoid showing preference, or at least that's what I assumed. On Sundays following services, the entire group would assemble around our maple table, which Henry had shaped himself. Richard would describe his goals to pursue engineering, while Damien would stay quiet, merely poking at the meal on his dish. Existence was straightforward, yet lovely. In the evenings, Henry and I would stroll the path circling our tiny community, discussing our aspirations, how we'd observe our descendants mature, and how we'd age jointly in that same abode. I never pictured those strolls were preparation for the one that nearly ended me. On weekends, I'd organize kin meetings where my siblings, Harriet and Irene, would arrive with their partners and offspring. The dwelling would overflow with joy, youngsters dashing about, females exchanging cooking tips in the cooking area while the males repaired items in the garden. Henry was my ideal companion. After 40 years wedded, he still presented me with field blooms he'd gather en route to labor. He assisted me evaluate my pupils' exams, and I would secure wood pieces for him as he sliced them in his workroom. We formed a partnership, an indestructible bond, or so I believed. At evening, we'd rest on the veranda to observe the stars, planning our tomorrow. We discussed journeys upon retirement, viewing the sea initially, constructing a smaller dwelling once our youngsters formed their own households. But flawless joy, as I'd learn later, often conceals the profoundest sorrows. When Richard reached 20, a shift occurred in our kin. He started disputing with Damien over matters I couldn't comprehend. I'd overhear them muttering in the corridor, and they'd quiet when I emerged. Henry assured me it was merely sibling matters, and that it would fade. I desired to trust him, since I required to trust my kin remained flawless. One evening in October, precisely 25 years past, Richard failed to return for supper. We waited until 11, then 12, then 1:00 a.m. Damien was in his space, allegedly learning, but I observed something odd in his gaze whenever I inquired about his sibling. Henry departed to hunt for him with our locals. They inspected every spot of the area, every route, every location Richard frequented. At daybreak, they located his remains at the base of the stream ravine. The authorities claimed it was a mishap, that he had likely tripped in the dimness. I never doubted that account, since I couldn't envision the reality was far more dreadful. Richard's burial was the gloomiest day of my existence. I donned my sole dark garment, the identical one I'd worn at my mom's burial. Damien was oddly composed for someone who had recently lost his elder sibling. While I wept until no moisture remained, he stayed mute with a look that now, after what I understand, causes chills. Henry never departed my side that day, supporting me when my limbs failed, murmuring soothing phrases that I now realized tasted sour on his lips. Following Richard's passing, Damien transformed entirely. He grew more considerate, more affectionate, as if compensating for an issue. He assisted with tasks, joined his dad at the workroom, and delivered items when he noticed I was down. I assumed it was his method of coping with sorrow, of occupying the gap Richard had created. How innocent I was. What he truly did was constructing an ideal disguise to conceal the beast within. The periods elapsed, and the injury never completely mended, but we adapted to it. Damien wed Melissa, a kind female from the adjacent community, and they appeared content. They produced two lovely youngsters, and I finally sensed existence offered us another opportunity at delight. Melissa addressed me as mother and aided with chores during visits. Damien had acquired his dad's skill for woodworking and possessed his own enterprise. All appeared ideal once more. But now, resting at the ravine's base with my bones fractured and the iron flavor of blood on my tongue, I grasped that all that delight was a meticulously built falsehood. The initial indicators that an issue existed started 6 months prior when Henry and I chose to revise our testament. We had conserved throughout our lives, and among the dwelling, the property I received from my folks and our financial reserves, we possessed almost $200,000 to bequeath our offspring and descendants. It was Damien who proposed we consult the attorney. Mother, father, you're both 60 now. It's vital to arrange all. He informed us with that grin that now appears ominous. Melissa would agree beside him, caressing my palm with those digits that would subsequently thrust me toward demise. We adore you greatly, and we desire to ensure you're safeguarded, she included in her pleasant tone. How silly I was to view those statements as true affection. The attorney, an elder male named Albert, whom we'd known for periods, outlined the choices. We could establish a fund, split the legacy among Damien's youngsters, or merely create a standard testament. Damien urged naming him and Melissa as our only beneficiaries, claiming they would manage fair allocation to the descendants. Moreover, he stated, "You're going to require us as you age. It's better for us to access the assets to support you correctly." Something in his manner unsettled me, but Henry appeared persuaded. My partner, who had always been more credulous than me, accepted the idea without strong opposition. I held reservations, particularly since I recalled how Richard had always discussed aiding us economically as we aged. My senior boy had schemes, visions of caring for us when needed, but Richard was absent, and Damien was our sole remaining offspring. We endorsed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon. I recall Melissa wore an attractive emerald outfit and offered me a large embrace post-event. "Now we're formally a bonded kin eternally," she murmured in my ear. Her terms caused a shiver then, though I didn't comprehend why. Damien clasped his dad's hand with a grin that failed to touch his gaze. That evening, as I prepared supper, I couldn't dispel the sense that I'd committed a grave error. The ensuing weeks were odd. Damien and Melissa began visiting more frequently, but their trips had an altered vibe. They no longer arrived merely to share time with kin. They always offered ideas on enhancing the dwelling, what funds to pursue, or what coverage plans to obtain. "Mother, consider selling this large dwelling and relocating to a smaller spot," Melissa suggested while inspecting our furnishings with appraising gazes. "We could assist you locate a cozy flat in the area, but I cherished our dwelling. Every section contained a recollection. Every chamber narrated a tale of our 40 years wedded. The cooking area where I'd made thousands of dishes for my kin. The workroom where Henry produced his creations. The garden where our offspring and descendants had frolicked. I couldn't envision my existence elsewhere. When I informed them this, I noticed a spark of annoyance in Damien's gaze that froze me deeply. "Mother, you're acting unreasonable," he stated in a manner he'd never employed with me previously. This dwelling is too vast for 2 individuals your age. If you tumble down the steps or something occurs, we won't assist promptly." Melissa agreed emphatically, adding, "Besides, the maintenance must expense a lot. It would be wiser to sell now, while property values are elevated, and shift to something more suitable for your stage." Henry started pondering their points. My partner, who had always been sensible, began discussing the reason behind their ideas. But I couldn't eliminate the sense that something additional lurked behind this urging. One evening, after another strained discussion, I questioned Henry if he didn't find it peculiar that Damien was abruptly so keen on our economic matters. "Hilda, he merely concerns us," he answered while cleaning his teeth. "Perhaps we should ponder his ideas. We're not as youthful as before." But I spotted something in my partner's gaze, a hint of uncertainty he refused to admit. Now I realize Henry already held doubts that he had begun linking clues I didn't even recognize existed. Matters intensified when Damien proposed we grant him authority over our finances. "It's merely for caution," he clarified while Melissa brewed tea in our cooking area as if she controlled it. "If one of you falls ill or faces a wellness problem, we can handle your issues sans judicial issues." The manner he expressed it so naturally, so rationally, it nearly convinced me, but there was something about his persistence that made me anxious. I couldn't rest that evening. I remained awake gazing at the roof, hearing Henry's respiration beside me, attempting to grasp why I felt so uneasy. The following day, I resolved to contact my sibling Harriet for guidance. Harriet had always been keener than me, more wary of individuals' motives. When I described Damien's urging, she was mute for a lengthy period. "Hilda," she eventually stated, "doesn't it appear odd to you that Damien is so eager to manage your funds?" "I mean, he has his own enterprise. He's succeeding economically. Why would he need such control over your finances?" Her terms struck me like a blow. She was correct. Damien had never appeared to face economic issues, had never requested loans, had never displayed signs of requiring our monetary aid. That afternoon, when Damien arrived for another of his discussions about our tomorrow, I resolved to challenge him directly. "Son," I stated as we rested in the sitting area, "why is it so vital for you to manage our economic matters? Your dad and I are still sound-minded." His response was prompt and revealing. His expression stiffened, and for an instant I spotted something in his gaze that recalled someone else, something chilly, assessing, and perilous. "Mother, it's not about management," he answered in a strained tone. "It's about affection, support, and kin duty." But the way he said kin duty sounded more like a warning than a sign of warmth. Melissa, who had been quiet until then, interjected with her pleasant but resolute tone. "Hilda, we simply desire what's optimal for you. It's hurtful to witness you fret about matters we could readily manage." That evening, after they departed, Henry and I had our initial major dispute in years. He thought I was overly suspicious, that I was seeking issues where none existed. I insisted something was amiss, that our boy's conduct had altered excessively. "Henry," I stated as we cleaned the plates, "do you recall what Damien was like prior to Richard's passing?" "He was distinct, more remote, more I don't know how to describe it, but there was something about him that frightened me." My partner halted cleaning the dish in his palms and regarded me closely. In his gaze, I spotted something I hadn't observed before. "Acknowledgement, Hilda," he stated in a very soft tone. "There are details about Richard's passing that I never shared with you." My heart started pounding so intensely I thought it would escape my torso. "What about Richard's passing?" I inquired with a quivering tone. My partner sat heavily in one of the cooking chairs, the same surface where we had shared thousands of kin dishes, where Richard used to complete his assignments, and where Damien had always stayed Silent, Henry passed his palms over his face as if attempting to wipe away the recollections that had plagued him for 25 years. The evening Richard passed, he started in a fractured tone. Damien wasn't in his space learning like he informed us. I saw him exit the dwelling around 8:00. I trailed him because something about his demeanor concerned me. He'd been very odd those days, more hostile, more bitter. My partner paused, regarding his palms as if the awful truth he had concealed for so long was inscribed on them. I saw them disputing by the ravine. Hilda, I heard them yelling terrible things at each other. My world started to whirl. What were they disputing about? I whispered, even though part of me no longer desired to know the response. Henry looked up, and I saw moisture in his gaze. Moisture he hadn't even released at our senior boy's burial. About the legacy, Hilda Damien was furious because Richard was the senior, because according to kin customs he would receive most of our holdings. But there was something additional, something about funds that Richard had discovered. What funds? I inquired, sensing the ground vanish beneath my feet. Henry exhaled deeply before proceeding. 3 days prior to his passing, Richard came to speak with me in the workroom. He had uncovered that Damien had been taking money from the kin reserves account, minor sums initially, but then bigger amounts. Richard had proof. He'd been probing for months. My mind refused to absorb what I was hearing. My junior boy, the one who had been so attentive post-Richard's passing, the one who assisted and supported us, had been taking from us since before his sibling passed. Why didn't you ever inform me? I accused Henry, sensing the deception double. Because when I reached the ravine that evening, it was already too late, he answered in a choked tone. I saw Damien standing next to Richard's remains. Our junior boy was shaking, weeping, and repeating repeatedly, "It was a mishap." It was a mishap. He regarded me with those desperate gazes and pleaded me to assist him. "Dad," he stated. Richard slipped when he was attempting to strike me. I merely protected myself, and he lost equilibrium. Tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. "But you trusted him," I murmured, even though I already knew the response. Henry nodded gradually with a look of culpability that had weighed on him for decades. He was my boy, Hilda. My junior boy was requesting my aid, and Richard was already gone. I couldn't revive one by ruining the other. I thought it was truly a mishap that Damien had absorbed his lesson, that he would turn into a better individual after this. And the taken funds, I inquired, needing to know every element of this horror. Damien assured he would repay it gradually, that he had taken the funds to fund a venture that had failed. He vowed he would never commit something like that again, and I trusted him, Hilda. God pardon me, but I trusted him because I needed to trust my boy wasn't a slayer. I rose from the surface, stumbling, grasping the wall so I wouldn't collapse. Everything I had trusted about my kin, about my remaining boy, about the last 25 years of my existence, was a falsehood. Did he repay the funds? I inquired, although I already knew the response from the expression on Henry's face. Never, he answered. In fact, he continued taking minor sums that I pretended not to observe because confronting him would mean admitting I had concealed a slaying. I became his partner, Hilda. Every time I remained mute, every time I acted not to notice the bank balance's decrease, I became more of his partner. The terrible reality began to form in my mind. "That's why he's so keen on managing our finances now," I murmured. "It's not because he concerns us. It's because he wants to complete what he began 25 years past." Henry nodded seriously. "And there's something else, Hilda. Something I just uncovered a few weeks past. What else could there be?" I inquired, feeling like my heart couldn't handle any more disclosures. Henry went to his desk and extracted some papers he had been concealing under other documents. "I've been quietly probing Damien's finances. His woodworking enterprise isn't succeeding as he wants us to trust." In fact, he's on the edge of insolvency. He owes more than $100 to several lenders and providers. The papers quivered in my palms as I read the figures. Damien wasn't the prosperous individual he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure who had been existing on deceptions and taken funds for decades. Does Melissa know all this? I inquired, recalling her pleasant grin and affectionate embraces. I'm certain she does, Henry answered. I've observed how she guides the discussions when they discuss our funds, how she poses specific queries about our reserves, the worth of the dwelling, our coverage policies. They aren't innocent queries, Hilda. They are queries from someone estimating exactly how much our demise is worth. That sentence froze me deeply. Our demise, I repeated in a whisper. It was the initial time I had considered that Damien might want to cause us bodily harm. Until that instant, I thought he just wanted to rob or deceive us. But if he had slain his own sibling for funds, what would prevent him from slaying his parents for the same cause? Henry, I stated, grabbing his palms, we have to contact the authorities. We have to inform them the truth about Richard and about what's occurring now. But my partner shook his head with the expression of despair that broke my heart. With what proof, Hilda? I'm a partner to concealing a slaying. If I speak now, I'll go to prison, too. And besides, who's going to trust an elder male of 65 who has been keeping this hidden for 25 years? He was correct. Do we just await for him to slay us like he slew Richard? We're going to be very cautious, Henry stated, trying to sound more assured than he truly was. We're going to find a method to safeguard ourselves, to collect proof too, but his terms were interrupted by the sound of the device. It was Damien, Hi, Mother. He stated with that pleasant tone that now sounded ominous to me. Melissa and I were pondering, and we believe it would be lovely to mark your 40th wedding milestone with something unique. How about we escort you to those peaks you've always mentioned next weekend? We could embark on a kin trek, capture images, and have an ideal day jointly. My blood turned icy. I regarded Henry, who had heard the discussion and had the same expression of terror on his face. That's a very kind notion, boy. I managed to answer in a quivering tone, but let us ponder it and we'll respond tomorrow. After ending the call, Henry and I regarded each other in quiet, knowing we had just received an invitation to our own demise. The peaks, I murmured. He's going to escort us to the peaks to slay us and make it appear like a mishap. Henry nodded seriously, just like he did with Richard at the ravine. That evening we didn't rest a minute, holding each other in our bed, planning how we could rescue ourselves from our own boy. The next few days were a horror of fear and pretense. Henry and I had to behave as if nothing had occurred when Damien and Melissa came to visit, grinning when they discussed the peak trip, agreeing when they excitedly informed us they were going to spend time with kin, but inside, every part of my being screamed with dread. I knew I was looking into the gazes of my senior boys' slayers, and that now they were scheming to do the same to me and my partner. Melissa arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a purchase sack and that glowing grin that now seemed like the sneer of a fiend. Hilda, dear, she stated, embracing me with those limbs that would soon thrust me to my demise. I purchased some provisions for our peak venture. Treats, liquid, produce, everything we'll require for the outing. She displayed the sack's contents as if she were an thrilled youngster, but I could only ponder how each of those items could be utilized to conceal our slaying. I also brought my new device, she added, extracting and costly electronic device. I want to record every instant of this unique day. They're going to be images we'll treasure eternally. The irony of her terms made me ill. The only image she would capture would be of our shattered bodies at the base of some ledge, if anyone ever located us. Damien appeared behind her carrying a fresh-looking trekking pack. Dad, he stated to Henry with pretended excitement. I purchased all the essential gear for a secure trek: cords, straps, lights, an aid kit. Every term that emerged from his mouth sounded like a harsh mockery. Security gear to scheme our slayings. The wickedness of the situation made me dizzy. Isn't it a bit risky for individuals our age? I inquired, trying to sound relaxed while searching for any excuse to cancel the trip. Melissa caressed my cheek with that false gentleness that churned my stomach. That's why we selected a very simple and secure path, she assured me. It's a trek even youngsters can complete. Plus, Damien and I will be there to support you the entire time. Yes, they would be there to support us until the precise instant they decided to shove us off a ledge. That evening, when they finally departed, Henry and I sat in our sitting area, shaking, not just from the chill, but from the total terror we had been suppressing for hours. "We can't go," I stated, grabbing his palms. "We just can't. We'll invent some excuse." "If we don't go," Henry answered in a serious tone, "they'll discover another method to slay us, maybe something that appears even more accidental, like a dwelling blaze or a theft gone awry. At least in the peaks, we know what they're going to attempt." His terms had a terrible reason, but they didn't soothe me at all. "So, what do you propose?" I inquired, desperate to locate some solution that would preserve our lives. Henry was thoughtful for a few minutes before responding. "We're going to proceed, but we're going to be ready. I'm going to conceal my mobile and set it to capture everything that occurs. If we manage to endure, we'll have proof. And if we don't," his tone broke, "at least someone will know the facts. On Friday evening, we could scarcely touch our supper." We knew it might be our final meal together in our dwelling in that cooking area, where we had shared so many joyful instants when we were a genuine kin. Henry reviewed his testament one more time, ensuring that if something occurred to us, at least Damien wouldn't obtain everything without there being some record of our doubts. I wrote a note, he confessed, extracting a sealed cover from his desk. "It's addressed to your sibling Harriet. In it, I explain everything we know about Richard's passing and what we believe Damien plans to do to us. I concealed it in the spot where we keep our vital documents. If we don't return from this trip, at least she'll know where to search for the truth." That evening, we went to bed, holding each other, murmuring terms of affection that could be our last. "If something occurs to me," Henry stated, "I want you to know that these 40 years with you have been the finest of my existence. Despite everything, despite the errors and the secrets, I adore you more than my own existence." I wept in quiet, memorizing the rhythm of his respiration, the warmth of his body, the aroma of his skin. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed to mock our situation. Damien arrived early, whistling a joyful tune that chilled my blood. "Morning, lovebirds," he called from the front entrance. "Ready for your big venture." Melissa appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day, except this was a wedding with demise. During breakfast, which we could scarcely consume, Damien explained the route we would take in detail. "It's a lovely path," he stated, spreading a chart on the surface. "It leads to a viewpoint where you can observe the whole valley. They say the sights are remarkable." His gaze shone with an excitement that seemed demonic. Of course, the sights would be remarkable. They would be the last we would observe in our lives. "The path has some steep sections," Melissa added, as if giving us useful visitor information, "but nothing that experienced trekkers like you can't manage." Her comment about our supposed trekking abilities sounded like a harsh joke. We were 260-year-olds who barely stroll through the park occasionally. As we loaded the vehicle, I saw Damien meticulously checking his pack, ensuring he had everything he needed for his scheme. I saw cords, a small spade, and something that looked like a signal device. "What's that for?" I inquired, pointing to the device. "For security," he answered without hesitation. "If we get misplaced or something goes awry, we can send a distress signal." Of course, they would send a distress signal after shoving us off a ledge so our bodies could be located, and it would be confirmed that it was a tragic mishap during a kin trek. Everything was estimated, every element had been schemed to make our slayings appear perfectly natural. The vehicle ride to the peaks lasted 2 hours that felt like an eternity. Melissa put on cheerful tunes, and she sang along with the songs as if we were really going on a fun kin outing. Damien drove carefully, obeying all the speed limits, stopping at every stop sign. He didn't want to risk a mishap that would ruin his perfect schemes. During the trip, Henry discreetly took my hand and activated the capture on his device. Everything that happened from that instant on would be captured. If we managed to endure, we would have proof. If not, at least the truth wouldn't perish with us. When we finally arrived at the path start, my heart was pounding so hard. I thought it would escape my torso. The place was lovely with tall trees and the sound of a nearby stream. But for me, it had become the setting for my own demise. Damien and Melissa took their packs out of the vehicle, grinning and joking as if it were the happiest day of their lives. Ready for the venture, Damien inquired, and for the initial time in 25 years, I saw the same cold glint in his gaze that he'd had the evening he slew his sibling. The path started out relatively simple, winding between lush trees and moss-covered rocks. Melissa walked ahead of us, constantly capturing images and commenting on the beauty of the landscape. "Look at those wild blooms," she exclaimed, pointing toward bushes full of yellow blossoms and that lovely bird. Her performance was perfect, that of a caring in-law enjoying a unique day with her elders. Damien walked behind us, supposedly to ensure we didn't lag. But I could feel his gazes on our backs like blades. Every time I turned to regard him, he grinned with that smile he had perfected over 25 years of deceptions. "How are you doing, mother and father?" he would inquire with false concern. "Need to halt and rest." After an hour of trekking, we began to ascend a steeper part of the path. My limbs already felt heavy, and Henry was breathing with difficulty. We weren't accustomed to this kind of exercise, and our murderous offspring knew it perfectly. They had chosen a route that would physically exhaust us, making us vulnerable for when the time came to execute their scheme. "We're almost at the viewpoint," Melissa announced. Although according to the chart I had seen at home, we still had at least another hour of trekking. Her lie confirmed that they had no intention of reaching the real viewpoint. The place where they planned to slay us must be much closer. During the trek, I tried to memorize every detail of the path, every tree, every rock that could serve as a reference if I managed to endure, and needed to explain to the authorities exactly where everything had happened. Henry was doing the same, and we occasionally exchanged glances loaded with terror and resolve. We knew we were walking toward our deaths, but we also knew it was our only chance to get evidence against our slayers. "Oh, look at that!" Melissa suddenly shouted, pointing to a rock formation that loomed to our right. "That ledge has an incredible sight. Why don't we ascend there to capture some unique photos?" My blood ran cold. There it was, the place they had chosen for our slaying. The ledge rose about 90 ft above the main path, accessible by a secondary route that seemed much more perilous than the one we had been following. The rocks were loose, there were fewer trees to grasp in case we stumbled, and from the top you could see a drop that fell into a deep ravine full of jagged rocks. "I don't know if that's a good notion," I stated, trying to sound casual. "That route looks pretty risky for individuals our age." But Damien had already started walking toward the turnoff, carrying his pack full of security gear that I knew he wouldn't use to rescue us. "Come on, mother," he stated with that tone he used when he was a youngster and wanted to convince me of something. "It'll only take a few minutes. Besides, Melissa's correct. The photos from up there are going to be remarkable." The way he said remarkable made me tremble. They would be remarkable for whoever saw them afterward as evidence of our mishap. Henry squeezed my hand discreetly, reminding me that his device was capturing everything. We had to proceed. We had to go all the way to get the evidence we needed. If we refused now, they would simply find another opportunity, another place, another excuse to slay us. The ascent to the ledge was exhausting. The loose rocks slid under our feet, and more than once I was about to fall. But the most terrifying thing was realizing how perfect this place was for a slaying. If someone accidentally tripped and fell from the top, there would be no way to endure. And most importantly, there would be no observers. Almost there, Melissa shouted from above, where she had already arrived with the agility of someone who had schemed this route carefully. Damien followed her and then assisted Henry and me complete the last few feet of the ascent. His palms on my limbs felt like the claws of a predator. The viewpoint was indeed remarkable. From there you could observe the whole valley, the peaks in the distance, and the stream winding through the trees. In any other circumstance, it would have been a lovely instant to share with kin. But knowing what I knew, the place seemed like the perfect setting for a horror. "Come over here for the photos," Melissa shouted, positioning herself near the edge of the ledge. "I want the valley to be in the background." Henry and I approached slowly, each step bringing us closer to our final destination. I could see Damien strategically positioning himself behind us, calculating angles, measuring distances. "Perfect," Melissa exclaimed, raising her device. "Now embrace each other and grin." Henry and I embraced, probably for the last time, while she captured image after image. Every flash of the device seemed like a bolt announcing the storm that was about to come. "Capture one more," Damien suggested, moving closer to us. "But this time, stand back a little, so the landscape looks better." One step back meant being exactly on the edge of the drop. Henry and I exchanged a look. The time had come. We moved back as we were told, feeling the solid ground disappear under our feet and only the emptiness of the abyss remaining behind us. Melissa raised the device one more time, but this time I saw something different in her gaze. There was no longer any need to pretend. The disguise had fallen. "Grin," she stated in a tone that was no longer pleasant at all. "This is going to be your final photo." At that instant, Damien lunged toward us with his limbs outstretched. The scheme was simple. Shove us backwards so we would fall into the void, capture some photos of the mishap, and then descend to discover our shattered bodies. But Henry had been preparing for this instant. In the last second, he managed to grab Damien's wrist and pull him forward. "If we're going to perish, you're coming with us," he shouted with a fury I had never seen in him before. For an instant, all four of us were teetering on the edge of the ledge, holding on to each other in a grim dance between existence and demise. Melissa screamed and tried to assist Damien, but the weight of all of us was too much. I felt the ground give way under my feet, felt gravity begin to win the battle. And then the four of us fell together, locked in a deadly embrace, screaming as the air whistled around us, and the rocky ground approached at breakneck speed. In those seconds that lasted an eternity, I thought of Richard, of how he must have felt when Damien shoved him into the ravine 25 years past. The impact was brutal. I heard the horrible sound of bones cracking, the sound of my own body shattering against the rocks. The pain was indescribable, but even more terrible was the taste of blood in my mouth, and the certainty that this time Damien had succeeded. This time there would be no observers to tell the truth, but then I heard Henry's voice, weak but clear. "Hilda, stay still, act lifeless," and I realized something incredible. I was still alive. The pain was so intense, I thought I would lose sanity. Every fiber of my body screamed in agony. I felt blood running down my face and something wet and sticky soaking my clothes. But Henry's voice echoed in my ears like a sacred order, "Act lifeless." With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling even my breathing so it would be imperceptible. A few feet away I could hear the moans of pain from Damien and Melissa. They had also survived the fall, but from their groans, they seemed to be in worse condition than we were. "Melissa," I heard my boy's broken voice. "Are you okay?" His concern for his spouse made my stomach churn. This individual, who had slain his own sibling and had tried to slay us, was still capable of feeling affection for someone. "I think I broke my limb," Melissa moaned. "It hurts so much, Damien. And what about the elders?" The disrespectful way she referred to us confirmed what I already knew. We had never been kin to her. We were just barriers on her way to our funds. I heard movement as if Damien were crawling toward us. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid he would hear it. "They're dead," he announced after a few minutes that felt like hours. "Both of them have their eyes open, but they're not breathing." His lie filled me with a strange hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe we would have a chance. "Perfect," Melissa whispered with a satisfaction that chilled my blood. "It worked just like we schemed. Well, except for the part where we fell too." I heard her bitter laugh. "At least we won't have to act like we adore them anymore." For the next few minutes, that felt like an eternity. Damien and Melissa discussed their situation. Both were hurt, but they could move. The scheme now was to crawl until they found a spot from which they could call for aid, and then tell the story of how they had miraculously survived a tragic mishap that had slain their poor elders. "Remember the account," Damien said to Melissa. "We were capturing photos when a rock came loose under Dad's feet. He tripped and trying to grab on, he pulled Mom with him. We tried to assist, but we fell too. It's important that our accounts match." "I know," Melissa replied. "We've practiced this 100 times. We're the traumatized survivors of a kin tragedy. Poor us, we lost our dear in-laws in a horrible mishap." Her performance was so convincing that if I hadn't lived the truth, I would have believed every word. Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled toward what they hoped would be their rescue. When silence finally fell, Henry whispered my name so low I could barely hear it. "Hilda, are you okay?" I answered in the same whisper, confirming that I was alive but terribly hurt. "My left limb is broken," he told me in a voice choked with pain, "and I think I have a few fractured bones." "What about you?" I did a mental inventory of my body. I felt a stabbing pain in my right limb. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it with a hammer, and there was definitely something wrong with my shoulder, but I was alive, and that was more than I had hoped for. "We're bad, but we're alive," I whispered. "It works, but there's no signal down here." That was the most terrifying part of our situation. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a ravine, hurt, and with no way to communicate with the outside world. If no one came to look for us, we would perish here slowly from thirst, hunger, or our wounds. "Henry," I whispered, "before it's too late, I need you to tell me everything. Everything that really happened the evening Richard passed." My partner sighed deeply as if he had been waiting for this instant for 25 years. "That evening," he began in a trembling tone, "Richard came to find me in the workroom. He was furious. He had papers in his palms, bank statements. He showed me evidence that Damien had been taking money from our accounts for months. Minor amounts at first, then larger sums. Richard had been probing because he had noticed discrepancies in our reserves. The physical pain mingled with the emotional pain as I listened to the truth that had been hidden for decades. Richard wanted to challenge Damien that same evening," Henry continued. "I tried to calm him down to convince him to wait until the next day, but he was determined. He said he couldn't rest knowing his younger sibling was taking from us. And you trailed him?" I inquired, even though I already knew the answer. "I trailed him because I was afraid of what might occur. I knew Richard's temper when he got angry, and I also knew, well, I had noticed something strange about Damien lately. A coldness that sent chills down my spine. When I got to the ravine," Henry continued, "I found them screaming at each other. Richard had the papers in his hand, waving them in Damien's face. 'You're a thief,' he was yelling. 'You're taking from our own parents.' Damien denied everything. He said Richard was crazy, that he was making things up. My heart raced as I imagined the scene. My two boys facing off in the dark, one accusing the other of betrayal. What happened next? Henry paused for a long time before continuing. Richard told him that if he didn't return the money and confess everything to us, he would tell us the truth himself. Damien went berserk. He yelled that Richard had always been the favorite, that he had always had everything easy, that it was time for things to change. And then Henry's voice broke. Damien shoved Richard. It wasn't a mishap. He shoved him with all his strength deliberately. I saw Richard trying to keep his balance, saw his limbs flailing desperately, looking for something to grab onto. But it was too late. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds. Why did you never tell me the truth? Henry sighed deeply, because when I got to where Damien was, he was crying, trembling, telling me over and over that it had been a mishap, that he hadn't meant to do it. He begged me not to tell you anything, that he couldn't lose you too. But you knew it was a lie, I murmured from the bottom of my heart. Yes, but he was my boy Hilda, my only remaining boy. How could I turn him over to the authorities? How could I destroy what was left of our kin? His justification hurt as much as my physical injuries. And the taken money, I continued. Damien promised me he would return it little by little. He swore it had been a bad decision, that he had been desperate, that it would never happen again. But he never returned a single penny. In fact, he kept taking, and I kept quiet because every day that passed made me more of a partner to his crime. Just then, we heard voices in the distance. Damien and Melissa had managed to find aid. Soon, rescue teams would be here, and our murderous offspring would play the role of their lives, the traumatized survivors of a kin tragedy. The voices got closer and closer, accompanied by the sound of helicopters flying over the area. The rescue team had arrived, and with them came the most crucial instant of our lives. Henry and I had to make a decision in a matter of minutes. Should we continue to act dead until we found the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth, or risk being rescued along with our slayers? Hilda, Henry whispered urgently. The device captured everything that happened up there. We have Melissa's confession about the scheme. We have Damien admitting that we are barriers. We have everything. But if they find us alive now, they can destroy the evidence before we manage to hand it over to the authorities. He was correct. If Damien and Melissa realized that we had survived and heard their confessions, they would find a way to silence us forever. This time it wouldn't be a mishap. It would be something much more direct and definitive. We had to wait for the perfect instant. "They're down here," Damien's voice shouted from above. "My parents, please hurry." His performance was perfect, his tone broken with pain and despair. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed he was a boy devastated by the loss of his parents. "Sir, stay calm," someone replied, which must have belonged to the head of the rescue team. "We're going to descend to evaluate you. You and your spouse can move." I heard the sound of cords and gear being prepared for the descent. Melissa had perfected her role as the grieving spouse. "I can't believe this occurred," she sobbed. "We were capturing photos so happy. It all happened so fast. A rock came loose and they fell." Her comment was a stab in my heart because I knew she would repeat those same terms to the authorities, to the media, to anyone who wanted to hear her version of events. The rescuers began to descend. I could hear their voices getting closer, the sound of their boots against the rock, the clinking of their gear. Henry discreetly squeezed my hand, reminding me that we had to keep up the act no matter what happened. "They're here," one of the rescuers shouted upon finding us. "We have 2 people at the bottom of the ravine." He approached us and began to examine us. I kept my eyes closed, and my breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. I felt his palms looking for a pulse on my neck, his ear close to my mouth, trying to detect breathing. "This one still has a faint pulse," he announced, referring to Henry. "The female, I'm not sure. I need the medical team down here immediately." My heart raced. The scheme was working. They would believe that Henry was on the verge of demise, but still alive, while I would be close enough to demise to not be an immediate threat. For the next few minutes, which felt like hours, the paramedics worked on us. I felt them put an oxygen mask on me, check my wounds, and secure me to a stretcher. The whole time, I had to fight against every instinct in my body that screamed at me to open my eyes, to ask for aid, to stop pretending. "The male is stable but critical," I heard one of the paramedics report over the radio. "The female is in very serious condition. Pulse is almost imperceptible. We need to transport them to the hospital immediately." Perfect. They would take us to the hospital, where we would have the opportunity to talk to the authorities without Damien and Melissa being able to silence us. During the ascent on the stretchers, I could hear Melissa's faked sobs and the terms of comfort that the rescuers offered her and Damien. "You were so brave to survive this," someone stated to her. "It's a miracle that you're relatively okay." If only they knew that the real miracle was that Henry and I were alive to tell the truth. In the medical helicopter, as we flew toward the hospital, I could feel Henry's presence on the stretcher next to mine. The paramedics were focused on keeping him stable, and from their conversations, I understood that he was in critical condition. His injuries were more serious than mine, and for a terrible instant, I feared he might perish before we had the chance to reveal the truth. "Ma'am," I heard one of the paramedics say to me, "if you can hear me, hold on. We'll be at the hospital in a few minutes." His tone was gentle, full of genuine compassion that contrasted dramatically with the falsehood I had been hearing from my own kin. When we arrived at the hospital, the chaos was immediate. Doctors and nurses ran from one side to the other, shouting medical orders I didn't understand. I was taken directly to an emergency room where they began to work on my injuries. I had to keep pretending to be unconscious, but I also had to find a way to communicate with someone I could trust. "Doctor," I heard a nurse say, "her vital signs are strange. Her pulse is stronger than we would expect for someone in her supposed condition." My heart skipped a beat. They had discovered me. I was such a bad actress that my own body was betraying me. The doctor murmured. "It happens sometimes in cases of extreme trauma. The body has mysterious ways of clinging to life. Let's keep a close watch. The lady, well, the next few hours will be crucial. We've done everything we can." Melissa made a sound that was supposedly a sob of pain, but to me sounded like a sigh of relief. "Can we see them?" Damien inquired. "Just for a few minutes. We need to say good-bye just in case," the doctor agreed, and soon I heard footsteps approaching my bed. It was the most dangerous instant of all. I had to convince my murderous boy that I was really dying. I felt Damien's presence next to my bed. His hand touched mine, and it was all I could do not to pull my hand away immediately. "Mother," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I adore you. I'm so sorry this happened." His terms were poisoned honey, sweet on the surface, but deadly in their essence. Melissa approached from the other side. "Hilda, dear," she murmured, "you've been like a parent to me. We'll never forget you, liar." The only reason they wouldn't forget me was because they would have to live with the knowledge that they had slain me. But then Damien leaned closer to my ear and whispered something that chilled my blood. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mother. You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried, just like Richard." At that instant, I knew our scheme had worked. Damien had just confessed, and even though I had no way to capture it, there was a nurse in the room who had heard every word. Damien's whisper echoed in my ears like a direct confession of his guilt. He had mentioned Richard. He had admitted that some truths should remain buried, and most importantly, He had acknowledged that our questions about finances had been the reason for our mishap. But I needed more than that. I needed a full confession that couldn't be misinterpreted or denied later. The nurse who had overheard the comment, a young female named Ince, according to her ID badge, had frozen next to the monitoring machine. I saw through my half-closed eyelids as her eyes widened in surprise and horror. She had heard something she shouldn't have heard, and her expression told me she understood the implications of those terms perfectly. "What did you say about Richard?" Melissa whispered, obviously surprised by the mention of the dead sibling. Damien tensed, realizing he had said too much. "Nothing," he muttered. "I just meant, well, Mother always wondered what really happened that evening. I guess it doesn't matter anymore, but it did matter." And Melissa was smart enough to realize that her husband had made a mistake. "Damien," she stated in a tense tone, "let's go. The doctors need space to work." I could feel the tension between them, the mutual understanding that they had said too much in the wrong place. After they left, the nurse approached my bed. "Ma'am," she whispered so low I could barely hear her. "I know you can hear me." "What I just heard is not normal. If you are in danger, you need to tell me somehow." Her tone had an urgency that filled me with hope. Someone else had started to suspect. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. It was the smallest possible movement, but Ince noticed it immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's pretending to be unconscious." I moved my finger again, this time twice. "Yes, listen," she stated, leaning even closer. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your monitors. If you are in danger from those people who were just here, move your finger 3 times. Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Ince gasped, "They did this to you." 3 more movements. The nurse moved away from my bed and pretended to check my Roman, while she processed what she had just discovered. I could see in her expression that she was struggling with the decision of what to do. Finally, she approached me again. "I'm going to talk to the doctor in charge," she whispered, "but I need you to keep pretending until we can protect you. Do you understand?" I moved my finger once. The next few minutes were agonizing. Ince left the room and I was left alone, waiting and praying that she would believe my story and take the right actions. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Ince accompanied by an older male who must have been the chief doctor and surprisingly 2 police officers. "Ma'am," the doctor stated in a low tone, "Nurse Ince told me about your situation. If you can hear me, we need you to know that you are safe now. The officers are here to protect you." A wave of relief so intense almost broke my act. "Can you open your eyes?" One of the officers inquired. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The hospital light blinded me for an instant, but I gradually managed to focus on the worried faces surrounding me. "Thank God," Ince murmured. "I thought I was going crazy." "Ma'am," stated the police officer, a middle-aged male with a serious expression. "I'm Detective Johnson. We understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. Can you tell us what really happened on that peak?" My tone came out as a raspy whisper after hours of pretending to be unconscious. My boy, and his spouse shoved us." The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, captures, and disclosures. I told Detective Johnson everything I knew. Richard's passing, Damien's takings, the urging to change our testament, and finally the scheme to slay us on the peak. But the most important thing was the capture on Henry's device. "Your husband has captured evidence?" the detective inquired, his gaze gleaming. "Yes," I replied. "Everything is on his device. The confessions, the schemes, everything." The detective immediately went to the room where Henry was being treated. Henry had regained awareness an hour after me, and when the detective explained the situation, he handed over his device without hesitation. "Here's everything," he stated in a weak but firm tone. 25 years of deceptions and the truth about what happened today. While the police technicians analyzed the capture, Damien and Melissa remained in the waiting area, playing their part as devastated kin members to other hospital visitors. They had no idea that their careful performance was about to end forever. "The capture is clear," the detective announced after an hour. "We have explicit confessions about Richard's slaying, admissions about taking funds, and direct evidence of premeditated attempted slaying against you too. It's more than enough to arrest them, but are you going to arrest them here?" I inquired, concerned about our safety. "If they realize we're alive and talking," the detective nodded, understanding my concern. "We already have officers in position. As soon as we have the arrest warrant signed, we'll take them in. In the meantime, you are both under police protection." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Damien and Melissa were down there probably talking to other patients' relatives, receiving condolences for our deaths, planning how to handle our burial and legacy. They had no idea that upstairs in the hospital rooms, we were tearing down their carefully constructed world of deceptions. "There's something else I need to tell you." "What else?" I inquired, though I wasn't sure my heart could handle any more revelations. "During the arrest, we found this in your boy's pack," he stated, showing me a small digital recorder. "Apparently, he had been capturing his discussions with you and your partner for the past few weeks, probably looking for evidence that you suspected something." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" the detective sighed. "It means he knew you were starting to discover the truth." The trip to the peak wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a direct response to your suspicions. In one of the captures, you can clearly hear Melissa telling him, "We have to act fast before they go to the authorities." The depth of the planning and the coldness of the calculation took my breath away. They hadn't just schemed to slay us. They had been monitoring our discussions, evaluating the level of danger we posed to them. We were mice in a maze, and they had been the observers watching our every move. "There's something else," the detective continued, "that we found in the probe of his finances. Your boy not only owed funds to dangerous lenders, but he had forged your signature on several documents trying to access your bank accounts. If you had perished on that peak, he would have had immediate access to all your resources. Every new revelation was like another stab. My own boy had not only schemed to slay me, he had been actively taking from me, forging my signature, and violating every principle of kin trust I had tried to instill in him." "How much funds did he take in total?" I inquired, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "About $50, Euro 0 over the last 5 years, the detective replied. "Minor amounts that he thought you wouldn't notice, but which when added up, amount to a significant sum. The funds Henry and I had saved over decades of hard work, penny by penny, had been financing our boy's life of luxury while he schemed our slaying." The following days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, visits from attorneys, and calls from news media that had picked up the story. The local press had titled the case the most horrible kin betrayal of the decade, and reporters from all over the country wanted to hear our version of events. My sibling Harriet arrived from the neighboring community crying and embracing me as if she hadn't seen me in decades. "Hilda," she stated over and over, "I always knew there was something strange about Damien after Richard's passing, but I never imagined he was capable of this." Her terms comforted me because they confirmed that my parental instincts hadn't been completely blind. "And the youngsters?" I inquired about my descendants who were now in the temporary custody of social services. "I saw them yesterday," Harriet replied sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents can't come home. They're too young to understand what really happened. The attorney we had hired, the same Albert who had prepared our testament, came to see us with news about the legal process. The case is solid, he assured us. With the captures, the confessions during the arrest, and all the financial evidence, it's almost impossible for them to escape significant convictions. But then he added something that chilled me to the bone. However, they are trying to negotiate a lesser guilty plea by claiming it was a crime of passion, not premeditated. A crime of passion, I exclaimed indignantly. They schemed this for weeks, bought special gear, and chose the perfect place. Albert nodded gravely. I know, and we have evidence of premeditation, but their attorneys are going to argue that it was a desperate decision made under extreme financial pressure. The idea that they could receive reduced sentences for their crimes filled me with fury. They had slain Richard. They had tried to slay us. They had taken our funds for years, and now they wanted to present themselves as victims of circumstances. What can we do to ensure they get what they deserve? I inquired. Testify, Albert replied simply. Your testimony, combined with all the evidence, will be crucial for the jury to understand the true nature of these crimes. But I warn you, it's going to be emotionally devastating to face your boy in court. He was correct. The idea of looking Damien in the eyes during the trial, of listening to his attorneys try to justify the unjustifiable, of publicly reliving every instant of this horror was overwhelming. But it was what I had to do for Richard, for us, and for my descendants who deserve to know the truth about their parents. 3 weeks after the arrest, Henry and I were finally able to go home. Our wounds had healed enough to allow us to move, although he still needed crutches, and I had my limb in a sling. The dwelling felt strange, as if it were the set of a play after all the actors had left. Everything was exactly as we had left it on the day of our kin outing. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink, the bed was unmade. The blooms Damien had brought me that week were still on the kitchen surface, now withered and dead. It was as if time had stopped at the instant. Our normal lives ended forever. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? I inquired Henry that first evening back as we lay in our familiar bed. He embraced me with his uninjured limb and sighed deeply. I don't know, Hilda, he stated, but we're alive. We have the truth on our side, and for the first time in 25 years, we don't have to live with secrets. The trial began 6 months later. On the day I had to testify, I looked Damien directly in the eyes for the first time since the arrest. I saw no remorse, no pain. I didn't see the boy I had raised. I saw a cold and calculating stranger who had disguised himself as my boy for decades. When I finished my testimony after recounting every horrible detail of our experience, I addressed him directly from the witness stand. Damien, I don't know who you are, but you are no longer my boy. My boy died the evening you slew Richard, and what has been living in his place for 25 years is a beast that I unwittingly helped raise. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Damien guilty of first-degree slaying for Richard's passing and first-degree attempted slaying for what he did to us. Melissa received the same conviction as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, 1 year later, Henry and I have begun the process of formally adopting our descendants. They are lovely and innocent youngsters who deserve a chance to grow up knowing what true affection is, not the manipulative and toxic affection they received from their biological parents. Every evening when I tuck them in, I tell them about their Uncle Richard, the sibling they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dream of